My father banned my grandparents out for not being good enough. Hours later, an ambulance arrived at their home. His cruelty was his final mistake. It drove me to expose a massive financial betrayal that stripped him of his perfect life in front of the entire town. The mornings in the River Arts district of Asheville, North Carolina, usually possessed a clarity that I could not find anywhere else. My studio apartment was a sanctuary of clean lines and intentional spaces. As a graphic designer, I believed that truth was found in the removal of excess. Every sketchbook was aligned, every digital file was categorized, and the sunlight hitting my industrial desk felt like a promise of honesty. I spent my days distilling complex ideas into simple shapes, searching for the core of a brand. I lived by the philosophy that if you have to hide behind clutter, you are probably lying about the product. Unfortunately, that was a lesson my father had forgotten long ago. The drive from Asheville to Highlands felt like traveling between two different worlds. Asheville was grit creativity and the smell of roasting coffee. Highlands was manicured silent and smelled of wealth that tried too hard to be inconspicuous. My father, Robert Vane, and his wife Sloane lived in a sprawling mountain contemporary villa that looked more like an art gallery than a home. It was a structure of glass and steel that seemed to stare down at the surrounding forest with a sense of entitlement. When I arrived for Thanksgiving dinner, the air inside the house was thick with the scent of expensive sandalwood and the sharp acidic notes of a vintage Napa Valley Cabernet. The lighting was curated to hide every wrinkle and every flaw. Sloane moved through the room in a silk dress that cost more than my monthly rent, her smile as polished and cold as the marble countertops. The guest list was a collection of people who measured their worth in stock portfolios and real estate acquisitions. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, listening to a man in a bespoke suit explain why he was liquidating his assets in the city. There was no laughter here, only the calculated clinking of crystal and the hum of soft jazz that felt like a barrier against the real world. I had brought a small, vibrant bouquet of wildflowers for my grandmother, Eleanor Vane. I had picked them near the trail in Waynesville the evening before, remembering how much she loved the unscripted beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains. They were messy, colorful, and smelled of the earth, a stark contrast to the sterile white orchids that Sloane had arranged in every corner of the house. I had handed them to a server earlier, asking him to place them in a vase for my grandparents' arrival. An hour into the cocktail hour, I realized I had not seen my grandma Eleanor or my grandpa Arthur. I moved toward the kitchen, hoping to find them helping with the meal as they always did. Instead, I found the kitchen staffed by hired professionals. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye in the large stainless steel trash bin tucked under the prep station. There, resting atop a pile of discarded vegetable peelings and expensive packaging, were my wildflowers. They were crushed, their stems broken, cast aside like a piece of refuse that threatened the aesthetic of the room. A cold knot tightened in my chest. It was not just about the flowers. It was about what they represented. I found my father in the study swirling a glass of dark amber bourbon. He looked at me with a distant, practiced warmth. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I asked him where Eleanor and Arthur were. I asked him why their place settings were missing from the long mahogany table in the dining room. Robert set his glass down on a leather-topped desk. He did not look ashamed. He looked inconvenienced. He told me that Sloane had decided to keep the guest list focused this year. He said that my grandparents were getting older and that the drive from Waynesville was too much for them. I told him that was a lie, that I had spoken to them 2 days ago, and they were excited to see the family. Then he looked me directly in the eye, his voice dropping into a flat corporate tone. He told me that this was an important evening for their social standing in Highlands. He said that my grandparents, with their mismatched clothes and their stories about the old days in the mountains, simply did not fit the class of the event they were hosting. He said it as if he were explaining a logical business decision. He told me that they were not welcome at the dinner because Sloane did not want the aesthetic of her evening ruined by people who did not understand the world they now inhabited. The honesty I craved in my work was suddenly present in his cruelty. It was a jagged, ugly truth. I did not argue. I did not shout. I simply turned around, grabbed my coat, and walked out of that glass cage. The cold mountain air felt like a cleansing fire as I reached my car. I drove away from the glittering lights of Highlands, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, headed toward the small weathered house in Waynesville, where love was actually a requirement for entry. I was halfway down the winding mountain pass when my phone vibrated in the center console. It was midnight. The caller ID showed the name of Hank, my grandparents' neighbor for 30 years. My heart dropped before I even pressed the button. "Liam," Hank said, his voice ragged and breathless, "you need to get here. The ambulance is on its way." I found Arthur on the front porch. He was dressed up in his best suit, just sitting there in the dark. "He must have collapsed while he was waiting for your father to call. He is not breathing right, Liam. It is bad." The fluorescent lights of Mission Health Hospital hummed with a clinical indifference that felt like a physical weight. I sat in the plastic chair of the waiting room, my hands still smelling of the cold mountain air and the copper tang of fear. Grandpa Arthur was behind double doors in the intensive care unit, his life measured by the rhythmic beep of monitors and the forced air of a ventilator. Grandma Eleanor sat beside me, her small frame trembling, her hands clutching a worn handkerchief. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had baked pies only days before. It was exactly 2:45 in the morning when the automatic glass doors slid open with a hiss. I expected my father to rush in with worry etched into his face. Instead, Robert and Sloane marched toward us, looking as though they had been interrupted in the middle of a coronation. Robert had removed his blazer, but his silk shirt was crisp, and the scent of expensive bourbon trailed behind him like a toxic cloud. Sloane followed her eyes, darting around the sterile hallway with a look of pure disgust, her sequins catching the harsh light in a way that felt almost violent. "What were you thinking, Liam?" Robert's voice was a low, dangerous hiss. He did not ask about the health of his father. He did not look at the intensive care unit doors. He stood over me, his face flushed with a mixture of alcohol and rage. "You walked out on a dinner hosted for the most influential people in Highlands. Do you have any idea how that looked? You made us look like we have no control over our own family. You embarrassed us in front of the very people who hold our future in their hands." Sloane stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum like a ticking clock. "The Sterling family was there, Liam. We were discussing the new development project and you vanished like a petulant child. And for what? For a fainting spell." She waved a hand toward the doors as if Arthur's collapse were a minor social inconvenience. "The elderly fall. It is a part of life. It did not require a dramatic exit that suggested we are anything less than a united front." I looked at them, and for a moment I could not speak. The gap between us was no longer just a difference in values. It was a chasm of humanity. "He is your father, Robert?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I had never known. "He waited on that porch in Waynesville for a call that never came. He was dressed in his best suit because he believed his son still cared. He almost died because of your vanity." Robert leaned in, his eyes cold and devoid of empathy. "He is old. This is what happens. We do not stop our lives for every stumble. You made a spectacle, and the rumors in town are already starting. I expect an apology to Sloane tomorrow for the way you treated her guests." They turned away to speak to a nurse, not with concern, but with a demanding tone about the quality of service and the privacy of their family name. Grandma Eleanor let out a soft, choked sob. She reached for her large leather handbag, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. "Liam, my heart pills. I think I left them in the side pocket. I cannot breathe right." I took the bag from her, my own heart racing. I began to search through the clutter of receipts and old peppermint wrappers. My hand brushed against a thick manila envelope tucked into a hidden compartment. It felt heavy and out of place. Curiosity, fueled by the adrenaline and the betrayal of the night, forced me to pull it out. As I looked for the medication, the envelope spilled open on my lap. I saw bank statements, but they were not for a simple savings account. They were records of systematic exploitation. My eyes scanned the lines and the numbers began to scream at me. There was a copy of a check for $7,500. It was made out to the private academy where Sloane's son was enrolled. The signature at the bottom was a shaky forced version of Grandpa Arthur's handwriting. Next to it was a series of automatic monthly transfers. $1,400 every single month drained directly from their modest pension and Social Security. It was not a gift. It was a financial bleed. They were paying for Sloane's luxury lifestyle and private school tuition while their own roof in Waynesville was leaking and their pantry was half empty. My breath caught as I reached the final document in the pile. It was a loan application for $45,000, a business expansion loan in my father's name. I turned to the signature page expecting to see Robert's name alone. Instead, I saw a second line. Co-signer Liam Vance. The signature was a perfect digital replica of my own. I had never seen this document. I had never agreed to back a $45,000 loan for a man who lived in a Highlands villa while stealing from his own parents. I realized with a sickening jolt why my recent applications for a new design studio space had been mysteriously flagged by the bank. My credit score, the foundation of my independence and my career as a graphic designer, was being systematically dismantled to fund my father's delusions of grandeur. I looked up from the papers to see Robert laughing quietly at something the nurse had said, his hand resting on the small of Sloane's back as if they were at a garden party. They were predators draped in silk. I looked at the folder, then at the man who had raised me to believe in integrity. The betrayal was so deep it felt like a physical wound. I tucked the medication into Grandma Eleanor's hand, but I kept the envelope hidden beneath my coat. My father thought he had won. He thought he could use us as a resource to be consumed and discarded. But as the sun began to rise over the Blue Ridge Mountains, casting a cold light on the hospital walls, I knew that the aesthetic of his perfect life was about to be shattered by the one thing he could not buy: the truth. As a designer, I knew that when a system fails, you do not ignore the error. You trace the code to its source. You isolate the bug. You delete the corruption. Sitting in my studio in Asheville the following morning, the clean lines of my workspace felt like a mockery of the chaos within my family. I realized that my father Robert and Sloane were not just a social embarrassment, they were a systemic failure. I opened a new file on my computer, but I did not label it with a client name. I titled it, Project Truth C0. 1. I called Sarah, a friend from my university days who had built a reputation as one of the sharpest estate attorneys in western North Carolina. We met at a quiet corner of a cafe in the River Arts District. I laid the manila envelope on the table, the stolen pension funds, the $7,500 tuition payment, and the forged $45,000 loan document. Sarah did not speak for a long time as she flipped through the pages. Her expression shifted from professional curiosity to a cold, focused anger. Liam, this is more than just greed. Sarah whispered, her eyes tracking the flow of money. This is a coordinated effort to strip them of their assets. But there's something you have not seen yet. I did a preliminary search of the Buncombe and Haywood County court filings this morning when you mentioned the tension. She pulled a tablet from her bag and slid it across the table. My heart stopped. It was a petition for involuntary guardianship. Sloane had filed it 3 weeks ago, claiming that Eleanor and Arthur were mentally incapacitated and incapable of managing their own physical or financial well-being. The goal is not just the money, Liam, Sarah explained. If the court grants Sloane guardianship, she gains total control over their lives. She can move them into any facility she chooses. And, more importantly, she can liquidate their assets. She has already listed the Waynesville house on a private real estate network for pre-market interest. She is planning to sell the family home to pay off that $45,000 loan and fund her lifestyle in Highlands before you or the authorities even realize what has happened. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. The house in Waynesville was not just wood and stone, it was the repository of every memory I held dear. It was the smell of wood smoke and the sound of my grandfather's laughter. To Sloane, it was merely a line item on a balance sheet. I drove back to Mission Health Hospital. I needed to see him. I found Grandpa Arthur awake, though he looked smaller than he had only 24 hours ago. He was propped up against the pillows, the hospital gown pale against his skin. But it was the chair next to the bed that broke my heart. Folded neatly over the back was his suit jacket, and resting on top of it was the green necktie. The knot was still tied, but it had been loosened, the silk frayed at the edges. It was a monument to a man who refused to let go of his dignity, even when his own son had abandoned him on a porch in the cold. Seeing that loosened knot felt like seeing a flag at a half-mast. My grandfather was a man of the mountains, strong, silent, and enduring. To see him reduced to a patient in a sterile room, targeted by the people he had spent his life helping, was the final catalyst I needed. I leaned over and took his hand. It was rough, calloused from years of honest labor. "I am going to fix this, Grandpa," I promised. He did not have the strength to speak, but he squeezed my hand, a faint glimmer of the old fire returning to his eyes. I spent the next 3 days in a state of hyper-focused observation. I did not confront my father or Sloan. Instead, I became a ghost in their machine. I used my technical skills to set up a secure digital vault for all the evidence Sarah and I were gathering. Every time my father called to berate me for ruining his reputation, I recorded the conversation. I sat in my car outside their villa in Highlands, capturing the arrival of luxury furniture deliveries that were being paid for with my grandmother's pension. I gathered affidavits from the neighbors in Waynesville, men like Hank, who had witnessed the neglect. I tracked the digital footprint of the forged loan, finding the IP address used to e-sign my name. It traced back directly to the home office in the Highlands villa. I was no longer just a grandson or a designer. I was a digital auditor of a moral bankruptcy. Robert and Sloan believed they were untouchable because they were wealthy and well-positioned. Oh, they believed my grandparents were too old to fight and that I was too artistic to be a threat. They were wrong. They had treated their family like a program they could rewrite to suit their needs. They did not realize that I was the one who knew how to read the code. The investigation was nearly complete. I had the records, the recordings, and the legal counterfilings ready to stop the guardianship. But I did not want to just stop them in a courtroom. I wanted the community they so desperately craved to see them for exactly what they were. I began to prepare the final presentation for the Waynesville Market Festival, the one place where their carefully crafted aesthetic would meet the raw, unyielding truth of the people they had betrayed. The Saturday market in Waynesville was the beating heart of our community. The air was filled with the scent of roasted peanuts, fresh apple cider, and the earthy aroma of dried tobacco leaves. Under the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, neighbors gathered to trade stories and support local artisans. It was a place of deep roots and long memories which made it the perfect stage for the truth. I saw them before they saw me. Robert and Sloan arrived in a polished black sport utility vehicle that looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of weathered pickup trucks. They stepped out wearing coordinated high-end outdoor apparel, their smiles wide and practiced. They moved through the crowd like politicians, stopping to pat shoulders and offer hollow greetings. They were here to perform a role the devoted son and the caring daughter-in-law, attempting to drown the whispers of their neglect with a display of manufactured warmth. They had even brought a large gift basket supposedly for my grandparents, though they knew Arthur was still recovering in the hospital. I did not wait for them to find a rhythm. I walked toward the small wooden bandstand in the center of the square. As a graphic designer who had volunteered my skills for this festival for years, the organizers did not hesitate when I asked to use the microphone and the large digital screen normally used for community announcements. The chatter of the market began to die down as I tapped the microphone. Robert and Sloan stopped near a stall selling honey, their expressions shifting from feigned joy to sudden apprehension as they realized I was standing on the stage. "Good morning, Waynesville," I began. My voice did not shake. It was steady, anchored by the weight of the evidence I held. "We all know that this town is built on the idea that we look out for one another. We believe in family. We believe in honoring those who came before us. But today I have to share a story about what happens when those values are traded for greed. Robert stepped toward the stage, his face beginning to flush a deep, angry red. "Liam, get down from there right now. This is a private matter. Do not make a fool of yourself." I did not look at him. I looked at the crowd, at the farmers, the teachers, and the shopkeepers who had known my grandfather for 50 years. "I am not here to argue," I said. "I am here to show you the numbers, because numbers do not lie." I signaled to Sarah, who was standing by the laptop. The large screen behind me flickered to life. I did not show family photographs. I showed the graphic analysis I had spent all night preparing. The first slide was a high-resolution scan of the check for $7,500 money taken from my grandfather's savings to pay for a private school for a child who was not even his own. The next slide showed the monthly $1,400 withdrawals, a systematic draining of a pension that was meant to provide security in old age. The crowd gasped. I heard a woman near the front whisper, "Shameful." But I was not finished. "This is not just about money," I continued. "This is about a betrayal of the soul." I advanced the slide. The screen filled with the legal petition for involuntary guardianship. I highlighted the paragraph where Sloan had claimed my grandparents were mentally incompetent so she could gain the legal right to sell the house right here in Waynesville, the house Arthur built with his own hands. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a community realizing they had a predator in their midst. Sloane's poise shattered. She began to scream, her voice high and shrill, accusing me of digital manipulation and slander. She tried to push through the crowd to get to the stage, but the people of Waynesville simply closed ranks. They did not move. They formed a wall of denim and flannel, blocking her path with the silent, immovable weight of their collective judgment. "And finally," I said, my voice rising over Sloane's frantic shouting, "there is the matter of the $45,000 loan. A loan my father took out by forging my name as a co-signer, nearly destroying my business and my future to fund a life he could not afford in Highlands." I projected the signature page. Beside it, I placed a sample of my actual signature. Even to the untrained eye, the digital forgery was obvious. It was a cold, calculated theft of my identity. Robert stood frozen at the edge of the stage. For the first time in my life, I saw him without his mask. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who had realized that his reputation, the thing he valued above all else, had vanished in the span of 5 minutes. At that moment, the low, steady pulse of blue and red lights appeared at the entrance of the market square. 2 cruisers from the Waynesville Police Department pulled onto the grass. I had called them an hour before, providing the digital evidence of the loan fraud and the financial exploitation of the elderly. As the officers stepped out of their vehicles, the crowd parted, not to let Robert and Sloan escape, but to lead the police directly to them. The happy family facade was gone. There was only the harsh light of the morning and the inevitable arrival of justice. I turned off the microphone and stepped down from the stage, walking away from the chaos and toward the hospital. I had a green tie to return to a man who had finally been set free. The fall of Robert and Sloan was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, quiet crumbling of everything they had built on lies. The legal proceedings regarding the forged $45,000 loan and the systematic exploitation of my grandparents took months to resolve. Robert's reputation in the Highlands and Asheville business circles vanished overnight. Facing mounting legal fees and the crushing weight of public shunning, they were forced to sell the glass villa at a loss. They left the Blue Ridge Mountains under the cover of night, heading toward a city where no one knew their names or the stories of the people they had betrayed. For them, the aesthetic of their lives had been replaced by the cold reality of consequence. I made a choice that my former self in the River Arts District would not have understood. I packed my studio in Asheville and moved into a small sun-drenched wooden house just 2 miles down the road from Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Arthur in Waynesville. I realized that my success was not measured by the prestige of my clients, but by the impact of my work on the community that had raised me. I began using my design skills to help local artisans, the potters, the honey farmers, and the woodworkers who had spent their lives perfecting their crafts without ever knowing how to tell their stories to the world. My new studio smelled of sawdust and fresh mountain air rather than industrial cleaners. I was no longer just a graphic designer. I was a storyteller for the soil. It was during one of these local projects that I met Claire. She owned a small flower farm on the edge of town, a place where rows of dahlias and snapdragons grew in intentional, vibrant chaos. Unlike Sloane, who demanded the rigid perfection of orchids, Claire understood the beauty of the unscripted. Wildflowers have a different kind of strength, she told me one afternoon as we worked on a new branding project for her farm. They have to survive the wind and the frost without a greenhouse. That makes their colors deeper. She was the first person who truly understood why I had brought those crushed flowers to the Highlands villa. She did not see a mess. She saw a legacy. Over time, her presence became a quiet, steady rhythm in my new life, a reminder that there were people who valued the roots more than the display. By the time the last of the autumn leaves had turned to a deep burnt orange, we held our own Thanksgiving. It was 2 weeks late, but for the first time in years, the timing did not matter. There was no glass villa, no imported wine, and no social climbing. We gathered in the small kitchen in Waynesville, the air thick with the scent of nutmeg, cinnamon, and roasting chicken. Grandma Eleanor moved through the kitchen with a renewed lightness. Her hands were steady as she placed a pumpkin pie in the center of the wooden table. It was not a curated dessert flown in from a distant city. It was a masterpiece of tradition, its crust slightly imperfect and its warmth filling the room. Grandpa Arthur sat at the head of the table. He was thinner now, and he moved with a cane, but his eyes were bright and clear. He wore his old suit jacket, but the detail that caught my breath was the green necktie. It was knotted, perfectly pulled tight against a clean white collar. It was no longer a sign of a man waiting for a call that would never come. It was a badge of a man who was exactly where he belonged. As we sat together, Eleanor, Arthur, Claire, and myself, I looked at the table. We did not have silver trays or crystal glassware. We had mismatched chairs and a pitcher of cold cider. But the silence in the room was not the suffocating silence of a Highlands dinner party. It was the peaceful stillness of people who truly knew and loved one another. I realized then that my work as a designer had always been about finding the truth in a brand, but I had nearly missed the most important truth of my own life. I had spent years trying to maintain a bridge to a father who was willing to burn mine down for $1. I had learned that you cannot fix a system that is designed to be broken. You have to build a new one. I reached across the table and took my grandfather's hand. The calluses were still there, a testament to a lifetime of honest work. I felt a profound sense of peace. The debt had been settled, the house in Waynesville was safe, and the cycle of exploitation had been broken. As I looked at the flickering candlelight reflecting in the window, I thought about everyone who might be sitting at a table feeling invisible or betrayed by their own kin. I wanted them to know that the walls do not have to stay up. You can walk out of the glass house and find your way back to the forest. Family is not about the blood you carry, but the way you protect those who once protected you. It is not found in the grand gestures or the expensive gifts, but in the quiet courage to stand for the truth when the world asks you to lie. It is the pumpkin pie on a scratched wooden table, the smell of wildflowers in a simple jar, and the dignity of a green tie worn for those who truly see you. I am Liam, and this is the truth of how I saved my family by finally letting go of what was never real. How did Liam's story resonate with you? Please share your reflections in the comments. Your feedback helps me create even better content. If you found this meaningful, follow for more stories about truth and healing. Let's keep this conversation going. Your support truly matters,